Today, my travels have brought us to Cusseta, Alabama, and this is going to be a little bit of a different story because it is, I guess you could consider a true crime. There is a death involved, but it wasn't like a person-on-person murder or anything like that. Today, we're actually going to be talking about this building back here behind me where it says AJIN USA. That is a company, and a woman was killed inside of there. And I'm gonna go around the building here. We're gonna talk about this whole story and what happened inside of that building right there behind me. I hate to say it because someone did die in it, but the whole story is kind of interesting, and it's very disturbing how it all played out, and hopefully you guys will appreciate this video at least. In February of 2010, the very first Kia automotive manufacturing plant opened its doors in the United States, bringing with it thousands of new jobs. And it's located right on the Alabama-Georgia state line. Technically, its address is West Point, Georgia, but it's right on the line. Obviously, as you can imagine, it takes a lot to build a car from scratch. So they have to have different parts made in other places and shipped into this facility to just be assembled on the car. This meant once they had decided that they were building this Kia plant, other plants also had to be built all around the main assembly plant to provide those parts that they needed, which also meant thousands and thousands of new jobs outside of the Kia plant. Both Georgia and Alabama couldn't be happier about this. 5 years prior, Hyundai had built an assembly plant not far away in my hometown in Montgomery, which also built a bunch of smaller plants for parts making. And because both Kia and Hyundai were sister companies, they used those same parts on either car. You can find Hyundai parts in Kia, and you can find Kia parts in Hyundais. Some parts are just interchangeable like that, most notably their engines. One of these companies that was built to supply Hyundai and Kia parts, it opened just a few miles down the road from the Kia plant in Cusseta, Alabama. It's called AJIN USA. These auto manufacturing factories, they attract a lot of people to them. For one, because they typically pay more than minimum wage, and for two, they usually have good benefits and labor unions. One of these people who came to work at the AJIN USA factory was a woman who was 20 years old named Regina Elsea. Regina's parents both worked for AJIN USA. Heck, so did most of her friends. Before AJIN was built here in Cusseta, there really wasn't anything else around, no big place like this to work where you could get good benefits and stuff and make decent money. They had to travel to find places. So when AJIN opened, all of her family came, and sometime later, Regina Elsea started working there. One of the downfalls that Regina and the other workers faced at AJIN USA was crazy quotas put in place by Kia. Kia enforced like super high quotas on these companies every week to keep up with their manufacturing process. If these companies for some reason didn't meet these quotas, then Kia would threaten not to buy the parts from them, and then everyone would lose their jobs. And obviously these companies don't want to do that. They don't want to spend all this money making these parts and then Kia not buy from them. These unimaginable quotas and deadlines made the factory have a work mentality where the workers spent very long hours on their feet. Their breaks were the absolute shortest amount of time that the law would allow. It was frowned upon to take time off, and they really wanted employees to have someone else to cover their stations if they did need to take a break, so they could stop any lulls in productivity. Because of these ridiculous quotas from Kia that was forced upon the factory workers, in most occasions, new employees weren't trained properly. They were just rushed out to the floor, and the people that were responsible for training were just told to get them out as fast as you can to keep the line moving. This meant that the trainers skipped a lot of steps in the training process, and the employees who were going out onto the floor, they weren't getting vital information that they might have needed. I'm sure it's probably different now inside of the factory since the events of the story that I'm going to tell today, but man, I couldn't imagine. It's like they were being worked to death inside of there. Regina Elsea, at first, she worked as many hours as she could. She was saving up her money, she was engaged, and they wanted to buy a new house. That way her and her fiance could move in together, and it didn't take very long at all, and she had saved up enough money for all of her deposits and all of that stuff, and she had even signed up with a program that was offered to them where they could get Kia cars right off the line. So she had a new car and she had saved up and they were getting a house. Regina was extremely happy about where her life was going at that time, even though when she was at work, she was being worked to death. Because things were going so well, Regina and her fiance decided that they were gonna finally get married after being engaged for years. Once they made this decision, Regina went to her bosses and she asked them for a week off so that she could have a wedding, and that way her and her husband could go on a honeymoon. At first, her bosses denied her request. They told her that they had way too many orders to fill for her to take an entire week off. But after they went back and forth for a little while, both parties settled on Regina getting just a couple of days off. That way she could have her wedding and spend a couple of days with her husband at least. On June the 18th of 2016, just 2 weeks before Regina's wedding, a tragic set of events would take place inside of this building that would not only change Regina's life forever, but also everyone who knew her and everyone who worked here in this factory. That morning, everyone's shift started off like normal. Most of the assembly in this plant is done by robots, but they have human employees who monitor the computers and the systems that operate those robots. At about 10 o'clock that morning, for whatever reason, they started having a bunch of problems with these robot arms, and one by one they would stop working. They would give off an error message or a fault code, and typically when that would happen, protocol dictated that they were supposed to call maintenance, who would immediately come down and fix whatever the problem was and then restart the machine. But employees were also told if they knew how to fix it and maintenance was taking too long to get there, that the employees should go ahead and fix the machines to get them back up and running to keep the line from stopping. The problem with that is an employee who just works the machine isn't told the proper ways of repairing the machines. For example, there's plenty of people out there who know how to drive a car on the road, but could never fix it if it broke down. And it's the same concept here, just because they know what buttons to push inside of this factory to make it go doesn't mean they can take it apart and fix it. Most of the employees here, they went through that abbreviated training program that I talked about, and that meant most of them probably wasn't even fully aware how the machines even operated. On this day, as the machines are stopping one by one, they initially try several times to call maintenance and no one is answering. So within 15 minutes that day, security cameras in the factory show that the employees had to enter the cages that surrounded the mechanical arms no less than 5 times to do repairs. Just before 11 a.m., the machine next to Regina's stops and it starts flashing and making sounds and all that. This machine is actually a welding arm that has several different tips on the end of it that welds metal rods onto the doors for the rear view mirrors. This was robot number 23. The person who was controlling robot 23 had no clue what that fault code is telling them the problem is, so they go and they call maintenance, who again does not answer, and that employee really has no other choice but to just go back to their station and kind of sit and wait. In this factory, the different departments are divided up into different teams. Each team has their own quota that they have to hit each week. Well, it just so happened that the machine next to Regina that went down, 23, it was one of her teammates. And because Regina had been there long enough, she recognized the fault code and she thought maybe she could fix the problem so that her team didn't get behind on their quotas and have to work longer hours to make them up. So Regina, who was on robot 25, she stops what she's doing and she walks over to robot 23, where Regina and a couple of other people from her team, they enter the cage that surrounds the robot arm. On the security camera footage, you can see Regina walk from one side of the cage to the other to the electrical panel. Regina has her back turned to the machine, so she's looking away from it, and she mashes a button that's supposed to fix the problem. And as soon as she hits that button, the robot arm all of a sudden comes to life again, and it swings around in her direction, and the two rods that were sticking off the arm, like where the hand would be, those two rods were the welding tips, and they very easily puncture and impale Regina with very little effort. And they lift her up off the ground and like pin her up against the side of the cage. It then senses that something's wrong, and it stops and kicks off another fault code, and it stops the arm, like disabling it in place. These welding rods went through the middle of Regina's back, and they went all the way through her body, coming out the front side of her. It was bad. It was real bad. There were 4 other people inside of this cage when this happened. None of them were injured by the arm except for Regina. She was the only person that got hurt, and this only took like a split second to happen. But as soon as it impaled her, the 4 other co-workers, they immediately saw what was going on, and they immediately started yelling for a supervisor or someone from maintenance to come down, just anyone who could come turn this machine off and get Regina free. Eventually, after Regina was pinned inside of that cage for quite some time, a maintenance crew member finally moseyed their way down there to the floor. Regina had been pinned there for 10-15 minutes now. They finally mosey their way down to the floor. It's about the same time paramedics are arriving on scene. The maintenance person is able to get the machine to move and come down, freeing Regina, and medical personnel are able to try and treat her, and they load her up and they rush her to the hospital. But the local hospital in Cusseta, they weren't equipped to deal with these type of injuries, so she was immediately life flighted to UAB Medical Center in Birmingham, and the very next day Regina succumbed to her injuries, passing away at the age of 20 years old on June the 18th of 2016. Regina's mother would later go on to say that AJIN USA only sent 1 single flower to Regina's funeral, and it was a fake flower at that. If that's the case, that's absolutely despicable. I can't validate this claim. This is just something that Regina's mother has said, and I thought I would share it because that's just horrible if that's the truth.
I have not heard from the company. We got 1 single little bitty fake flower at her funeral. I mean, it's not that I want there. I'm sorry, because I don't care less about there. I'm sorry, but we haven't got it. I'm sorry, nothing. We haven't heard anything.
As you can imagine, a massive investigation took place after Regina's death. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, discovered that AJIN USA had been cutting some serious corners, which was a lot of the reason why this tragic event happened. For one, by law, inside of each cage where the robotic arms were, they were supposed to have been guarded by either a sensor at the door or a sensor mat that detected pressure when someone was standing on it, that let the machine know when there was a human inside of the cage. And no matter what happened, as long as it sensed a human in the cage, it would not turn the machine on. None of the robot arms inside of this factory had these safety measures, which was a serious violation. Another issue was that normally assembly line employees should not have been working on these machines themselves. By OSHA standards, only people who are certified to work on the machine should have been allowed to do so, which meant only the maintenance department should be in there doing it. And the third and biggest problem was a lack of training. You see, each robotic arm has what's called a lockout or a tagout. So if someone is entering the cage, the personnel can physically turn a key or push a button, and the machine will not operate again until you manually turn that key back or push or unpush that button. These lockouts were required by the robot manufacturers, and they were present on all of the machines inside of the AJIN factory. But because of Kia's ridiculous quotas and AJIN USA fast-tracking employees through training, they were not told about this lockout procedure, and that would have prevented this from happening. Essentially, even if Regina was going into the robot arm cage, she should have pushed the button and taken the key out on the emergency stop. Then she could have went in, fixed the problem, then exited the cage, and the robot arm would have not been able to come back to life. And then once she got out and everything was all clear, she could have put that key back in, pulled the button out, and then the robot would have turned back on and went back to its operating position. Had she followed these procedures, she would almost certainly still be alive to this day, but she was never taught them. Because of this neglect, OSHA came down pretty hard on AJIN USA, and they even went so far as to send one of its top people all the way to South Korea to speak to the head of Kia face-to-face about all the hazardous conditions at the supplier factories. OSHA then released a report worldwide because of Hyundai and Kia's on-demand production targets that are so high. Suppliers are having to cut corners to meet those targets at the expense of their workers' lives and limbs. OSHA would go on to fine AJIN USA $2.5 million for its neglect that cost a life, citing more than 27 different safety violations. Then after that, Regina's family came in and they sued AJIN, and AJIN was ordered to pay her family another $1.5 million in damages for Regina dying. OSHA then stationed investigators inside of the factory for a long period of time after all of this happened, just to make sure that they were following all the safety laws. And pretty much from that point forward, AJIN did. They took it seriously. They certainly didn't want anyone else to get hurt, and they didn't want any more bad press. That was the key thing here. They didn't want any bad press. It took years for AJIN USA's image to get past this. Nowadays, not many people even remember that this happened, at least until this video goes viral and it's all back in the public eye again. But back then, right when it happened, everyone was talking about it, and even Kia took a hit in sales because of this disaster at AJIN that rubbed off on them. Today, AJIN USA has supposedly turned it all around. They promote workplace safety while boasting that it's been a long time since they've had any kind of workplace accident. Regina's death was certainly a tragic turn of events that 100% could have been avoided if only they had made sure all of the employees had gotten the proper training that they needed. As I said at the beginning of this video, this story today was different. It wasn't your typical person-on-person murder and that there was a death involved, but it was a machine-on-person death, which is exactly what happened here. That is going to do it for this video today from here in Cusseta, Alabama, and the death of Regina Elsea. I want to thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it, you guys. I can't thank you enough for watching these videos. If you're new here, go down, hit that subscribe button, then hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a video. If you're one of those wanting to help support the channel, you can check out the links down in the description box below. Thank you guys. I will see you again tomorrow. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Much love to all of you.